She swapped her baby girl with the millionaire's son, but the billionaire was watching the entire time, and he let it happen. 19 years later, my biological son walked into my office holding hands with the daughter I raised as my own, completely in love, calling her his girlfriend. They had no idea they were brother and sister, living in each other's stolen lives, and in 3 days I was going to destroy them both at a gala in front of the world's cameras. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. I'm not the victim in this story, I'm the monster. And what I did by staying silent was far worse than the crime I witnessed. Charlene Martin, you thought no one saw you that night. You thought your secret gate in that dark nursery. But I, Albert Grant, stood behind the glass, watching every moment, every tear, every desperate prayer. You took my son because you believed I had everything while you had nothing. You wanted your daughter to have my fortune, my name, my life. I didn't stop you. I raised your daughter for 19 years. I had a better plan. 19 years later. Dad, this is Patricia, my girlfriend. Kyle Patterson stands in my office, proud, nervous, completely unaware. The boy carries my blood but bears another man's name. My real son, the one I should have raised, stands before me, in love with the girl I raised as my daughter. I smile. Welcome to the family, Patricia. Behind me, my wife Elena adjusts her pearls, studying Kyle with suspicion. Where did you say you're from, young man? Small town, ma'am. My mother raised me alone. Worked 3 jobs to get me through school. Charlene Martin's son, the one she kept, the healthy boy who should have been hers. I watch them hold hands, their love innocent and pure, unaware they're living each other's destinies. Flashback setup, the nursery. That night, I could have stopped her, could have called security, could have pressed charges. Instead, I paid the nurses to stay silent, erased the security footage, made the night disappear like it never happened. Why, Elena asked when I told her years later, our marriage already crumbling under the weight of my deception? Because I needed to know what kind of woman steals a child, what she would do with mine, and what her daughter would become raised in wealth. Patricia grew into everything I never expected. Compassionate, brilliant, grounded. Nothing like the cold, entitled world I built around her. Meanwhile, Kyle struggled. I tracked him through private investigators. Watched Charlene work herself to exhaustion, guilt eating her alive, trying to give him everything she never had. Hello, friends. If you enjoy heartfelt stories like this, please subscribe, like, and tap the bell icon. It's quick, free, and means the world to us. Thank you. Now let's return to the story. Mr. Grant, the preparations for Patricia's 21st birthday gala are complete. My assistant hands me the guest list. At the bar, Kyle Patterson, +1. Perfect, I say, and make sure the media is there. Every outlet, every camera. Sir, this isn't just a birthday party, Miss Chen. This is the night the truth comes home. 19 years of watching, waiting, building the perfect stage for the perfect reveal. Patricia doesn't know she's not my blood. Kyle doesn't know he is. Charlene thinks her secret is safe. But secrets don't fade in the shadows. They grow teeth. And in 3 days at the gala celebrating my daughter's coming of age, I'm going to let the beast loose. Because some revenge is best served after 19 years of careful planning, the hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and secrets. I found the head nurse in her office, filing paperwork with mechanical precision. Margaret Chen, 43 years old, 2 kids in private school, mortgage payments that ate half her salary. I'd done my research in the hours since I'd watched Charlene Martin walk away with my son. Mrs. Chen, I closed the door behind me. We need to talk about what happened tonight. Her pen stopped mid-stroke. Mr. Grant, I don't know what you... The security footage from the nursery. I placed an envelope on her desk, thick, heavy. The kind of weight that changes lives. I need it gone. The birth logs altered. Tonight erased. She opened the envelope. Her hands trembled when she saw the check. 6 figures. More money than she'd see in 5 years of night shifts and double overtime. I have children, Mr. Grant. So do I, Mrs. Chen. That's why we're having this conversation. Her eyes met mine, searching, questioning, afraid. She saw something there that made her close the envelope and nod once. Just once. It never happened, she whispered. Exactly. By sunrise, the hospital's digital records showed one truth. Albert and Elena Grant welcomed their daughter Patricia at 2:47 a.m. Charlene Martin's baby girl was stillborn at 2:52 a.m. The nursery cameras malfunctioned during the shift change. A tragic coincidence. Nothing more. I stood at the hospital window and watched Charlene Martin leave in a borrowed car, my son wrapped in a threadbare blanket she'd probably owned since her own childhood. She held him like he was made of glass and miracles. Her face, young, exhausted, destroyed by grief and guilt, disappeared into the gray morning. I could have stopped her then, still could have made the call. Instead, I went home to my wife and the sick infant in her arms, and I said nothing. The first year I hired investigators, discreet ones, the kind who ask no questions and produce monthly reports in manila folders marked confidential. Subject resides at 423 Elm Street, apartment 2B. Works double shifts at Rosie's Diner on Highway 9. Child healthy. Subject appears devoted. I read every report, studied every photograph. Charlene waitressing in a grease-stained uniform, dark circles permanent beneath her eyes. My son, Kyle, she'd named him, strapped to her back in a homemade carrier while she scrubbed tables after closing. The apartments were the kind with bars on the windows and sirens for lullabies. The diner paid minimum wage. Her tips barely covered formula and rent. I could have helped. One anonymous donation, one scholarship fund, one act of mercy. But mercy wasn't the point. Observation was, punishment was. Understanding why a desperate woman would commit the unthinkable, that was what I'd paid for with my silence. So I watched, and I waited, and I raised her daughter as my own. Kyle Patterson grew up hungry, not for food, though there were nights when dinner was toast and apologies, but for something he couldn't name. The investigators' reports tracked his evolution. Straight A student despite changing schools 3 times, worked after school at 14, bagging groceries to help with bills, applied to scholarships the way other kids applied to colleges, desperately, hopefully, as if education was the only bridge from where he was to where he needed to be. At 16, he won the regional science fair. The photograph in the local paper showed him holding his trophy, Charlene crying beside him in her waitress uniform, her hands still rough from dish soap and shame. I framed that picture, kept it in my desk drawer. My son had my eyes, my stubborn jaw, the same restless energy that had built Grant Holdings from nothing. But he had her heart, her resilience, the kind of strength that only grows in darkness. He feels it, the investigator wrote in one report. The mother says he asked questions. Why doesn't he look like her? Why does he feel like he's supposed to be somewhere else? She tells him he's imagining things. The invisible thread between blood and destiny, pulling him toward a truth neither of them could face. Across town, in the marble mansion that should have been his, Patricia Hutchinson grew like a flower in a greenhouse. Beautiful, protected, and somehow aware she didn't belong in such perfect air. Elena adored her with the fierce desperation of a woman who'd nearly lost everything. But Patricia was never satisfied with adoration. She asked questions other children didn't ask. Why do rich people have so much when others have nothing? Why don't you smile in old photographs? Daddy? What happens to babies whose mothers can't keep them? I raised her with the quiet tenderness of a man guarding stolen goods. Piano lessons and private tutors, but also soup kitchens at Thanksgiving and hospital volunteer shifts in pediatric wards. I taught her that wealth was a responsibility, not a reward, that privilege demanded payment. She became everything I'd hoped she wouldn't, soft where my world was hard, compassionate where it was cruel. She looked at homeless people on street corners and saw humans, not statistics. You're too kind for this world, Elena told her once. Maybe the world needs more kindness, Patricia replied. She had Charlene's eyes, Charlene's empathy, the capacity to love people who'd never love her back. And every time I looked at her, I saw the sick infant Elena had cradled that first night. Fighting for every breath. Against all medical odds, she'd survived, thrived, transformed into this luminous girl who made me believe in second chances, even if I didn't deserve one. 19 years of parallel lives. Two children growing toward each other like trees bending across a river, their roots tangled beneath ground neither could see. Kyle worked his way through college on scholarships and student loans, studying business and economics as if he could decode the secret language of the world that had rejected him. Patricia attended the same university, elite, expensive, a campus where every building bore her family's name, studying social work and nonprofit management, as if she could atone for wealth she'd never earned. They existed in the same city, walked the same streets, breathed the same air, and then, inevitably, terribly, beautifully, they found each other. The investigators' report came on a Tuesday. Subjects made contact at university charity event. Interaction sustained. Recommend continued surveillance. I closed the folder and looked out my office window at the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, my son was falling in love with the girl I'd raised. The girl who was his sister by circumstance, but not by blood. The collision I'd been waiting for had finally begun, and I was the only one who knew the truth would destroy them both. The Grant Foundation Gala always glittered with the same predictable excess. Crystal chandeliers catching light like captured stars, champagne towers that cost more than most people's monthly rent, guests draped in jewelry that could fund a small country's education system. I'd built this world, and tonight, I was about to watch it crack. Kyle Patterson moved through the crowd with the careful invisibility of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. Scholarship students recruited to serve at university fundraisers, cheap labor disguised as networking opportunity. He wore a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, carried a tray of champagne flutes with practiced steadiness, and kept his eyes down the way the poor learn to do in rooms full of people who've never questioned whether they belong. But I saw him, had been tracking his path through the ballroom for the past hour, watching him navigate the same marble floors my daughter walked across like she owned them. Because in this version of the world, she did. Patricia stood near the orchestra in a silk dress the color of seafoam, laughing at something one of Elena's society friends had said. She'd grown into the kind of beauty that made people stop and stare, not just because of her face, but because of something deeper. A light that wealth couldn't buy, or poverty extinguish. She had her real mother's warmth, my son's intensity. The collision happened at precisely 9:47 p.m. Kyle, backing away from a cluster of guests, turned directly into Patricia's path. The champagne flute tilted. Liquid gold arcade through the air in slow motion, or maybe time actually paused, the universe holding its breath before destiny clicked into place. The champagne splashed across Patricia's dress like a baptism. The ballroom fell silent. Heads turned. Elena's gasp carried across the room. Kyle's face went white. I'm so sorry. I didn't see. It's okay. Patricia's voice cut through his panic. Soft, genuine. Really, it's just a dress. Their eyes met. I watched from the balcony above, my champagne glass frozen halfway to my lips, as something ancient and inevitable passed between them. Recognition without understanding. Connection without explanation. The invisible thread that had been pulling them toward each other for 19 years finally drawing taut. Kyle stared at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. Patricia smiled, not the polite society smile Elena had taught her, but something real, and laughed. Actually laughed. You know what? I hated this dress anyway. Too formal. My mother picked it out. It's beautiful, Kyle said, then immediately looked horrified at his own boldness. I mean, the dress is beautiful. Was beautiful. Before I wanna... What's your name? Kyle Patterson. Patricia. She extended her hand, champagne still dripping from her sleeve. And I think you just saved me from the most boring conversation of my life. I recognized the look on Kyle's face. Had seen it in the mirror 25 years ago, the first time I'd held real power in my hands and felt the world shift beneath my feet. But this wasn't power he was feeling. This was something more dangerous. This was home. The investigators' report arrived 3 days later. Subjects made secondary contact at University Technology Lab. Duration, 4 hours, 17 minutes. Interaction appears voluntary and sustained. I didn't need the report. I'd already known on. Patricia had found him in the basement computer lab where scholarship students work between classes. She'd walked in carrying 2 coffees, sat down across from him like it was the most natural thing in the world and said, "Tell me about your research." They talked until the building closed, about his AI algorithms and her nonprofit dreams, about growing up feeling like you're living someone else's life, wearing someone else's skin, about ambition born from necessity versus ambition born from expectation. I've never had to worry about money, Patricia admitted, but sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in everything I have. Does that make sense? I've worried about money my entire life, Kyle replied. But I've never felt poor until I met people who've never had to worry. Now I feel like I'm missing something I can't name. They were both right, both wrong, both searching for the same thing without knowing they'd already found it in each other. The reports kept coming, study sessions in the library, coffee between classes, late-night phone calls that stretched until dawn. They fell in love the way young people do, slowly, then all at once, between stolen glances across lecture halls and hands that brushed accidentally on purpose, in the space between what they said and what they couldn't yet admit. Kyle started smiling at his phone, stopped coming home for dinner, talked about the future like it was something bright instead of something to survive. Charlene noticed. "Who is she?" she asked one night, watching him stare out the window of their apartment with the same distant look she'd seen the night she brought him home from the hospital. "Just someone from school." "What's her name?" "Patricia." The name came out like a prayer, like a confession. "Patricia Grant." Charlene's coffee mug slipped from her hands. It shattered on the linoleum floor, cheap ceramic splitting into pieces that could never be put back together. "What's wrong, Mom?" "Nothing." She bent to pick up the shards, her hands shaking so badly she cut her finger. Blood welled up, bright red against pale skin. "Nothing's wrong." But everything was wrong. The past she'd buried 19 years ago was clawing its way back to the surface, wearing her son's smile and that girl's name. That night, she called the one person who knew the truth. "Catherine," she whispered into the phone, her voice breaking. "He's in love with her, with the millionaire's daughter, with my daughter." The silence on the other end lasted forever. "Then you know what you have to do," Catherine Boyd finally said. "Tell him the truth before it destroys you both." But Charlene couldn't, because the truth wouldn't just destroy her. It would destroy the only person she'd ever truly loved. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The same storm that had covered her sin 19 years ago, returning to demand payment for borrowed time. 20 years of silence can rot the strongest foundations. I returned to St. Mary's Hospital on a Tuesday morning when the hallway smelled of industrial cleaner and overworked nurses moved with the mechanical efficiency of people who've seen too much death to waste time on pleasantries. Margaret Chen had retired 5 years ago, and the head nurse who'd taken her place, a brisk woman named Sandra Kim, didn't know about the envelope that had bought her predecessor's silence, didn't know about the records that had been altered in the dark hours before dawn. But institutional memory runs deeper than personnel files. "I need to see the birth logs from October 2005, I told the records clerk, a young man whose badge read Marcus, student intern. "Specifically the 23rd. "That's old, probably in archives. Can I ask what this is regarding?" I slid my business card across the counter. "Albert Grant, CEO, Grant Holdings." "It's personal." The files arrived in a banker's box marked 2005, maternity. I carried it to a private room, closed the door, and opened the lid on the past I'd been pretending not to examine. The original logs were there, the ones before Margaret Chen had worked her magic with correction fluid and careful forgery, tucked behind the official records like a ghost haunting its own grave. October 23rd, 2005, 2:47 a.m. Grant, Albert, and Elena, male infant, 7 UBS, 4 OZ, healthy. October 23rd, 2005, 2:52 a.m. Martin, Charlene, female infant, 4 UBS, 2 OZ, respiratory distress. I traced my finger across my son's original birth record. The boy who'd been stolen wore another man's name now. Kyle Patterson, after Charlene's father who died when she was 16. A ghost claiming a ghost. I took photographs, sealed them in an envelope marked evidence, returned the box to archives with a generous donation to the hospital's pediatric wing. The truth had always been there, waiting in manila folders and faded ink. All I'd done was confirm what I'd witnessed 19 years ago, what I'd allowed. Kyle arrived at Grant Holdings the following Monday, nervous energy barely contained beneath a borrowed suit that fit better than his last one. Patricia had helped him shop for it, another detail from the investigators' reports that I'd committed to memory. "Mr. Grant," he shook my hand with a grip that tried too hard. "Thank you for this opportunity. I still can't believe you selected me for the mentorship program. I believe in investing in talent." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "And according to your professors, you're exceptionally talented." He was brilliant, not just intelligent, brilliant in the way that reshapes industries and rewrites rules. 3 hours into our first session, I watched him solve a logistics problem my senior analyst had been struggling with for weeks. He sketched solutions on the whiteboard with the confidence of someone who'd spent his life turning nothing into something. He had my mind, my drive, the same relentless hunger that had built this empire from borrowed capital and audacity. But he smiled like Charlene when he talked about Patricia, softened around the edges in a way I'd never learned to do. "She wants to change the world," he told me during our third meeting, unable to keep her name out of the conversation. "Really change it, not with money or influence, but with actual human connection." "And what do you want, Kyle?" His eyes met mine, my own eyes, staring back from a face that should have grown up in this office instead of in apartments with bars on the windows. "I want to deserve her," he said quietly. "That's all." The words hit like a confession, like an accusation. "Do you deserve her?" The voice in my head whispered. "Do you deserve any of this?" 300 miles away, Charlene Martin stood at her mailbox with trembling hands, staring at an envelope with familiar handwriting. No return address, just her name and Catherine Boyd's careful script. She opened it, standing there on the cracked sidewalk, beneath a streetlight that flickered like a dying heartbeat. "Charlene, I'm old now. Too old to keep carrying secrets that don't belong to me. You can't run forever. The truth has a way of finding light, and when it does, everyone burns. That boy loves the girl. The real father is watching. And you're the match that's going to set the whole world on fire. If Kyle ever finds out what you did, he won't forgive you. But worse, he won't forgive himself for loving her. Tell him the truth before someone else does." Catherine. The letter slipped from Charlene's fingers. She stood frozen until a neighbor's dog barked her back to reality. Then she gathered the paper like it was evidence of a murder and stumbled inside. That night, she crept into Kyle's room the way she used to when he was small, and nightmares pulled him from sleep. He lay twisted in sheets, his face half illuminated by streetlight filtering through thin curtains. Half in shadow, half in light, neither fully hers nor fully his own. "I saved you, didn't I?" she whispered, tears tracking mascara down her cheeks. "I gave you life. I gave you everything." But her voice trembled with doubt, with the growing certainty that saving someone and stealing them might be the same sin wearing different words. Kyle stirred but didn't wake. In sleep, he looked like the infant she'd carried out of the hospital, innocent, unburdened, unaware that his entire existence was built on a foundation that was already cracking. "I'm planning something special for Patricia's 21st birthday," I told Elena over dinner that Friday. "A gala, something she'll never forget." Elena smiled, setting down her wine glass with practiced elegance. "How wonderful. She deserves something grand. Should I coordinate with the event planner?" "I've already started the arrangements. I want it to be a surprise." "For Patricia?" "For everyone." Something in my tone made Elena pause, her fork suspended midair. "Albert, what are you planning?" "A revelation," I said quietly. "One that's 19 years overdue." "You're being cryptic." "I'm being honest, for the first time in 2 decades. She studied me the way she used to when we were young and still believed we could read each other's minds. But years of living parallel lives had made us strangers who shared a house and a lie. This surprise," she said slowly, "it will make Patricia happy. It will make her free." Elena didn't ask what I meant. Perhaps she didn't want to know. Perhaps she'd already guessed that some surprises don't come wrapped in ribbons and joy. They come wrapped in truth. And truth, I'd learned, was the most expensive gift I'd ever give. Love, I've learned, doesn't recognize borders drawn by bank accounts. Kyle and Patricia's relationship bloomed in the spaces between worlds. Coffee shops where students studied until closing, libraries where wealth couldn't buy understanding, campus gardens where her designer clothes meant nothing and his scholarships didn't matter. They existed in a reality they'd built together, one where the only currency that mattered was attention, honesty, and time. She introduced him to her circle slowly, carefully, like someone presenting something precious to people who might break it. Her friends, children of senators and CEOs, kids who summered in the Hamptons and thought trust funds were as universal as air, treated him with polite curiosity. A specimen, the scholarship boy dating their Patricia. But Kyle navigated their world with quiet dignity, answering questions about his background with the economy of someone who'd learned early that explaining poverty to the wealthy was like describing color to the blind. My mom raised me alone, he'd say simply. She worked hard. I work hard. That's the story. Patricia loved him more for what he didn't say, for the pride that kept him from performing gratitude or apologizing for taking up space. He fixed her car when the chauffeur forgot to pick her up from class, lay under the engine in his thrift store jeans while she held the flashlight, both of them laughing at the absurdity of a billionaire's daughter learning about spark plugs. "You know we have mechanics for this," she said. "You know you don't need them," he replied. Their love felt real, unspoiled. The kind of connection that blooms when two people recognize something essential in each other, something that transcends circumstance. I watched it all through investigator reports and Patricia's increasingly distracted dinners at home, and felt the guilt tighten around my throat like a noose I'd tied myself. Elena discovered them on a Wednesday evening. She'd gone to the university to deliver documents Patricia had forgotten. Always the dutiful mother, always managing details her daughter should have remembered, and found them in the courtyard. Kyle's arm around Patricia's shoulders, her head on his chest, both of them laughing at something on his phone, oblivious to the world passing by. Elena said nothing then, drove home in silence, waited. The trap sprung at Friday dinner. "Patricia," Elena began, voice smooth as polished silver and twice as cold. "I met your friend today. Kyle, was it?" Patricia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. The air in the dining room shifted, pressure dropping like before a storm. "He's not just a friend, Mom." "No?" Elena's smile could have cut glass. "Then what is he, besides a charity case playing dress-up in our world?" "Elena," I started. "Don't." Patricia's voice was quiet, deadly. "Don't you dare." "I dare plenty, darling. I dare to ask what you think you're doing with a boy who works 3 jobs and still can't afford proper shoes. I dare to wonder if you've completely lost perspective on who you are." "I know exactly who I am. Do you?" Elena slammed her wine glass down hard enough to crack the stem. Red wine spread across white linen like blood at a crime scene. "You're Patricia Grant. You have responsibilities, standards. You don't throw your life away on some ambitious nobody who thinks he can buy love with charm and student loans." Kyle, who'd been invited to this dinner as Patricia's guest, sat frozen at the table. His face had gone pale, then red, then blank, the careful neutrality of someone who'd been humiliated before and learned to survive it by going somewhere else inside his head. "He's not nobody." Patricia stood, her chair scraping across marble. "He's more real than anyone I have ever known. He's poor, Patricia. There's a difference between charity work and bringing charity home." "You think you can buy love with charm, boy?" Elena turned on Kyle with surgical precision. "You're a charity case. Know your place." Patricia stormed out. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the mansion like a gunshot. Kyle stood slowly, carefully, like someone defusing a bomb. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Grant." His voice was steady, professional, completely empty. "I should go." He left through the front door with his dignity intact and his heart visibly shattered. Elena poured herself more wine, satisfied. Someone needed to say it. I said nothing. What was there to say? That she just destroyed the boy I should have raised? That her cruelty toward my son made me complicit in ways she couldn't imagine? I left the table without a word. I found Patricia in the garden where I taught her to plant roses when she was 7. She sat on the stone bench beneath the willow tree, mascara streaming down her face, shoulders shaking with the kind of sobs that break something fundamental inside a person. Dad! She looked up when she heard my footsteps. Please tell me you don't agree with her. I sat beside her, put my arm around shoulders that felt too fragile to carry the weight of what I'd done to her life. Tell me about him, I said quietly. He's kind. He's brilliant. He works harder than anyone I've ever met. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But that's not why I love him. Then why? Because when I'm with him, I feel whole. Her voice cracked on the word. My entire life, I've felt like I'm missing something. Like I'm not quite right for this world, or this world isn't quite right for me. But with Kyle, that feeling stops. I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The words cut through me like a blade forged from my own guilt. When I'm with him, I feel whole. She was whole with him because he was her blood, her actual brother, though neither of them knew it. The invisible thread pulling them together wasn't romance. It was DNA trying to correct my 19-year-old mistake. Dad? Patricia looked at me, confused by my silence. Are you okay? No, I said honestly. I haven't been okay for a very long time. That night I stood before the window in my study, watching rain begin to fall. The same rain that had covered Charlene's crime 19 years ago. The same rain that had tapped against hospital glass while I made the decision that damned us all. Lightning flashed, illuminating the city below. Somewhere out there, Kyle was nursing his humiliation. Charlene was drowning in guilt. Patricia was crying into her pillow, feeling broken in a world that should have loved her. And I was the architect of all of it. The rain fell harder. I pressed my hand against the glass, feeling the cold seep through. I'd built an empire on silence, raised a daughter on lies, watched my son struggle in poverty as punishment for a crime he didn't commit. But Patricia's words echoed in my skull. When I'm with him, I feel whole. I'd stolen her wholeness. 19 years ago, in a moment of cruel curiosity, I'd condemned her to feel incomplete until she found the one person who could make her whole and ensured that loving him would destroy them both. The rain drummed against the window like an accusation. I picked up my phone, dialed my assistant. Miss Chen, I said quietly, move Patricia's birthday gala up, 3 weeks from now. Sir, that's very short notice. I know. Do it anyway. And make sure every media outlet in the city is there, every camera, every journalist. May I ask why? Because, I said, watching rain blur the city into abstract impressions of light and shadow, it's time to end the lie. Charlene had been preparing for this dinner all week, cleaning the apartment until her hands cracked, buying groceries she couldn't afford, practicing smiles in the bathroom mirror that never quite reached her eyes. Mom, you don't have to do all this, Kyle had said, watching her scrub counters that were already spotless. Patricia isn't like that. She won't judge. But Charlene knew better. Rich girls always judged. They just did it quietly, with polite smiles and careful distance. She'd served enough of them at the diner to recognize the species. Still, she'd cooked roasted chicken with vegetables, homemade bread that made the apartment smell like something other than desperation. Set the table with mismatched plates she'd bought at Goodwill, arranged just so, hoping they looked intentional instead of poor. When the knock came at 6:00 p.m. sharp, Charlene smoothed her dress, one of her 3 good ones, reserved for funerals and parent-teacher conferences, and opened the door. Patricia Grant stood in the hallway holding flowers and wearing jeans. Jeans. Not the designer dress Charlene had been dreading, not the judgment she'd been preparing for. Just a girl with her son's smile reflected on her face, looking nervous and hopeful and impossibly, devastatingly beautiful. Mrs. Martin, I'm Patricia. Thank you so much for having me. Charlene's mouth opened. No sound came out because Patricia had her eyes, the exact shape and color Charlene saw in the mirror every morning. The eyes she'd given to the daughter she'd left behind in that hospital nursery 19 years ago. Mom? Kyle touched her elbow gently. You okay? Yes, sorry, come in, come in. The words came automatically, her mouth moving while her brain screamed. They sat at the small kitchen table, the three of them barely fitting in the space that suddenly felt suffocating. Patricia complimented everything, the food, the apartment's cozy charm, the photo of Kyle's high school graduation on the wall. She was kind, genuine, everything Charlene had imagined her daughter might become if given the chance. Everything that made this worse. Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Martin, Patricia said, leaning forward with real interest. Kyle says you've worked incredibly hard to give him opportunities. I just did what any mother would do. Charlene's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. Kyle deserved better than what life gave him. He's lucky to have you. No, Charlene thought. You're the one who got lucky. You're the one who got everything. Patricia reached for the breadbasket, and that's when the kitchen light caught the gold bracelet on her wrist. Time stopped. The engraving was small, elegant, clearly expensive. For my daughter, love, Albert. The fork slipped from Charlene's fingers. It clattered against her plate, then the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the suddenly airless room. Mrs. Martin, Patricia's voice came from far away. Are you all right? The bracelet? She remembered that bracelet, had seen it glinting in the hospital gift shop window the day before she gave birth, delicate gold links with space for an engraving, $800, more money than she'd had in her entire life. She'd pressed her hand against the glass and imagined buying it for her daughter someday, when things got better. And Albert Grant had bought it instead, for the daughter he didn't know wasn't his. I'm sorry, Charlene stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. Excuse me, I'm not feeling well. She made it to her bedroom before her legs gave out, collapsed against the door, sliding down until she sat on the floor, hand pressed against her mouth to keep the pointing silent. The apartment's thin walls meant they could hear everything, laughter at birthday parties, arguments about unpaid rent, the sound of her son's future crumbling because she'd been too desperate, too selfish, too broken to make better choices. Her hands shook so violently she could barely dial the number. Catherine answered on the third ring. Charlene? It's her. The words came out strangled, broken. The girl from that night. Kyle brought her home. He's in love with her, Catherine. He's in love with my daughter. The silence on the other end lasted an eternity. The millionaire's daughter, Catherine said finally. Not a question, a confirmation of the nightmare they'd both known would come. She was wearing a bracelet, gold, engraved with her name, his name, Albert Grant's name. Charlene pressed her fist against her mouth, tasting salt and regret. She has my eyes, Catherine, my smile, but she's wearing his jewelry and his last name. And she's falling in love with the boy who should have been. Then you know what you must do. Catherine's voice was gentle but implacable. Tell the truth, before it destroys all three of them. I can't. The words ripped out of Charlene like a confession. If I tell him, he'll hate me. He'll never forgive me. And Kyle? God, Kyle will realize he's been in love with his own sister. Catherine finished. Your daughter, his sister. The word hung in the air like an executioner's blade. I'll lose him. Charlene's voice broke completely. He's all I have. The only thing I did right was raising him. And if he finds out I stole him, that every moment we've had was built on a lie. You'll lose him either way, Charlene, either to the truth now or to something worse later. That man, Albert Grant, he knows what you did. You think he's just going to let this play out naturally? Men like him don't forgive. They plan. They wait. Through the thin wall, Charlene heard Kyle laughing at something Patricia said. The sound of his joy, genuine, unguarded, complete, shattered something in her chest. I can't tell him, she whispered. Not yet. Not while he's happy. Then you're a coward, Catherine said, not unkindly. And cowards don't get to choose how their sins come home. The line went dead. Charlene sat in the dark of her bedroom, listening to her son fall deeper in love with the girl she'd stolen from, while outside the thunder rolled, the same thunder that had covered her crime 19 years ago, returning to collect its debt. The storm, it seemed, had been waiting for this moment all along. When she finally emerged with makeup reapplied to hide the evidence of her breakdown, Kyle and Patricia were doing dishes together, laughing, touching hands in the soapy water like the world wasn't about to collapse around them. Patricia turned and smiled, Charlene's own smile, worn on a face that should have been hers to raise. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Martin. It was perfect." Nothing about this is perfect, Charlene thought, and soon everyone will know. The Grant Towers ballroom glittered like a cathedral built to worship wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors. Diamond necklaces caught fire under strategic spotlights. The city's elite moved through the space like sharks in designer gowns. Senators and CEOs, old money and new power, all gathered to celebrate Patricia Grant's 21st birthday. They had no idea they'd come to witness an execution. I stood at the edge of the crowd, watching my daughter, Charlene's daughter, greet guests with the grace Elena had spent 19 years cultivating. Patricia wore midnight blue silk and the gold bracelet I'd given her on her 16th birthday. She smiled, laughed, played the role of the perfect heiress. But her eyes kept searching the room for Kyle. He'd arrived 15 minutes ago, uncomfortable in a rented tuxedo, hovering near the champagne fountain like someone afraid to take up space. Patricia found him within seconds, her face transforming the way it only did around him. Walls dropping, light pouring in. My son and my daughter, in love, surrounded by people celebrating a lie. Charlene stood near the kitchen entrance, wearing her catering uniform. I'd arranged it personally, called in a favor with the event coordinator, ensured she'd be working tonight. She needed to be here when the truth detonated, needed to face what we'd both done. She looked like she was attending her own funeral. The orchestra finished their set. The crowd noise dimmed to an expectant murmur. My assistant handed me the microphone, her expression carefully neutral. She didn't know what was coming. Nobody did, except me, and Charlene, and 19 years of silence that had turned toxic in the darkness. "Good evening." My voice carried across the ballroom, smooth and controlled. "Thank you all for joining us to celebrate Patricia's 21st birthday." Applause rippled through the crowd. Patricia smiled, surprised to see me at the microphone instead of Elena. "Birthdays mark transitions," I continued. "Childhood to adulthood, innocence to understanding. But tonight, we're not just celebrating Patricia's birthday." I paused, letting the room settle into complete silence. "Tonight, we celebrate truth." The lights dimmed. The massive screen behind me flickered to life. Two images appeared side by side, blown up to 10 feet tall. Hospital records, birth certificates, both dated October 23rd, 2005. Grant, boy, 7 Lobes, 4 OZ. Healthy Martin, girl, flawless 2 O's, respiratory distress. Elena's champagne glass hit the floor. The sound of crystal shattering was the only noise in the suddenly airless room. 19 years ago, I said, my voice steady despite the screaming in my skull, I watched a desperate woman switch her dying child for my healthy son. The crowd erupted, gasps and whispers spreading like wildfire through dried timber. Cameras flashed, journalists surging forward. But I kept talking, the words I'd been rehearsing for weeks finally finding air. And I let her. Patricia's face had gone white. She turned slowly, searching the crowd until her eyes found Charlene. Charlene swayed, her tray of champagne flutes crashing to the marble floor. Then her legs buckled and she went down, 2 waiters catching her before her head hit the ground. "What is this?" Elena's voice cut through the chaos, shrill with rage and confusion. "Albert, what are you—" "The truth, Elena. The daughter you've been raising isn't ours. The son I never knew is standing right there." I pointed to Kyle, who stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, every camera now swiveling toward him. "Kyle Patterson, my biological son." Patricia moved first, walking toward Charlene with mechanical precision. 2 waiters had revived her, propped her against a wall. Mascara streaked her face. Her uniform was soaked with spilled champagne. "You're my—" Patricia's voice broke. "You're my mother." Charlene looked up at her, tears streaming, unable to form words, just nodded once. A confession, an apology, an ending. Kyle stepped forward, pushing through the stunned crowd. His face had gone from shock to understanding to fury in the space of seconds. When he reached Charlene, I thought he might scream, might hit something, might break. Instead, his voice came out quiet, deadly. She may have made a mistake, he said, turning to face me directly. But she gave me life. She raised me. She loved me every single day for 19 years. His eyes burned into mine, my own eyes, looking at me with the kind of judgment I'd earned. Can you say the same? The ballroom fell silent. Every guest, every camera, every person who'd come to celebrate wealth and legacy now waited for my answer. I had none, because he was right. I'd watched, observed, investigated, orchestrated revenge with the patience of someone who had all the money and time in the world. But I'd never claimed him, never loved him, never given him the one thing Charlene had, despite her crime, despite her poverty, despite everything, which was the simple act of showing up every single day and trying. My voice failed. The microphone slipped from my hand, feedback screeching through the speakers. Patricia collapsed into a chair, her perfect posture finally breaking. Elena stood frozen, her carefully constructed world crumbling in real time. Charlene sobbed against the wall, years of guilt finally finding release. And Kyle, my son, the boy I'd condemned to poverty to satisfy my curiosity about human nature, just stared at me with the look of someone who'd just realized the monster wasn't hiding under the bed. It had been watching from above the whole time. The cameras kept flashing. Headlines were already being written. The grand empire I'd spent my life building was collapsing under the weight of a truth I'd held too long. I'd wanted to end the lie, wanted justice, wanted to prove that secrets don't stay buried. Instead, I'd proven only one thing, that the cruelest prisons are the ones we build ourselves, and the sentences last far longer than we imagine. The ballroom erupted into chaos, guests fleeing, security trying to restore order, journalists shouting questions I couldn't hear over the roaring in my ears. But all I could see was Kyle's face and the question he hadn't asked, but that hung in the air like an executioner's blade. If you knew for 19 years, why didn't you save us? I had no answer. I'd never had an answer. And now it was too late. Elena moved first. She crossed the stage with the fury of a woman who'd just realized her entire life was a performance in someone else's play. Her hand connected with my face, the sharp crack of palm against cheek audible even over the chaos in the ballroom. 21 years, she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. You let me raise another woman's child. You let me love her. You watched me pour everything into a daughter who wasn't mine, and you said nothing. Elena, don't. She stepped back, her designer gown trembling with each breath. Your empire, it's built on deceit. Your fortune, it's paid for with cruelty. And our marriage? She laughed, a broken, bitter sound. It died 19 years ago. I just didn't know I was the only one attending the funeral. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising. You want a story? Here it is. Albert Grant, the great philanthropist, the humanitarian, watched a desperate woman commit a crime and turned it into a 20-year experiment. He's not a victim. He's a monster. The ballroom erupted again. Elena stormed toward the exit, security parting for her like the Red Sea. I watched her go, knowing I'd never see her again except through lawyers. Mr. Grant, a journalist shoved a recorder in my face. Did you really let someone steal your son? Why didn't you stop her? The question I'd been avoiding for 19 years. I looked across the ballroom to where Charlene still sat against the wall, surrounded by broken glass and ruined champagne. Our eyes met, two architects of the same disaster, finally facing each other without the buffer of silence. I thought, my voice came out hollow. I thought letting her fall would teach her a lesson. I thought watching her struggle to raise my son in poverty while her daughter lived in luxury would prove something about human nature, about class, about justice. And did it? The journalist pressed. No. The word felt like swallowing glass. It just made me hollow, made me into exactly what my wife said, a monster who sacrificed his own child's happiness to satisfy his curiosity about suffering. Charlene stood, walked toward me through the stunned crowd, her movements mechanical, inevitable. When she reached me, I saw the girl she'd been 19 years ago, young, desperate, broken by circumstances I'd never had to face. "You punished innocence to prove you were powerful," she said quietly. Then she slapped me, harder than Elena had, hard enough that my ears rang and blood filled my mouth from where my teeth cut my lip. "You had everything," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I had nothing. I made a choice in desperation. But you made a choice from cruelty. You're worse than I ever was." She was right. Of course she was right. A commotion near the center of the ballroom drew every eye. Patricia had gone pale, her body swaying. Kyle caught her as she collapsed, lifting her with the kind of gentle competence that spoke of practice, years of taking care of someone who needed him. "Patricia!" Elena's voice came from somewhere in the crowd, maternal instinct overriding her rage. But Kyle was already moving, carrying his sister, through the chaos towards a side exit. Security cleared a path. I started to follow, but Kyle's eyes met mine over Patricia's unconscious form. "Don't," he said. "You've done enough." They disappeared through the service entrance, and I stood in the center of my collapsing empire, bleeding from the mouth, surrounded by cameras and consequences. Outside the Grant Towers, paparazzi swarmed like locusts. News vans blocked traffic. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights turning the street into a stage. I found him 3 weeks later at a construction site on the east side, working under the name Marcus Chen. The investigators had tracked him through cash jobs and borrowed identities. My son had learned to disappear the way I'd learned to manipulate, both of us masters of our respective survivals. He wore a hard hat and work gloves, hauling lumber in the morning rain. I watched him from my car for 20 minutes before gathering the courage to approach. He'd lost weight, moved like someone carrying invisible wounds. But he worked with the same intensity I recognized in myself, the kind that says, if you stop moving, you might shatter. "Kyle?" He froze mid-step, lumber balanced on his shoulder, turned slowly. His face showed no surprise, just the exhausted resignation of someone who'd known this confrontation was inevitable. "How did you find me?" "Does it matter?" He set down the lumber with careful precision, pulled off his gloves. "What do you want?" The question I'd been asking myself for 3 weeks. What did I want? Forgiveness I hadn't earned, absolution I didn't deserve, a chance to undo 19 years with money and influence, the only tools I'd ever trusted? "You're not my mistake," I said quietly. "You're my redemption." He laughed, bitter, sharp. "I'm nobody's redemption. I'm just the kid who got caught in the crossfire of two people's cruelty." "I know." I pulled an envelope from my jacket. "I can't undo 19 years, but I can give you back your name, your future." Inside was a scholarship deed to MIT, full ride, no conditions, keys to a penthouse apartment in Cambridge, stock certificates worth enough to never worry about money again. Everything I should have given him from birth, compressed into paper and legal documents. Kyle took the envelope, opened it, looked at the contents without expression, then handed it back. "I don't want your money." His voice was steady, calm, more devastating than rage. "I want my life back. The one where I don't look at the girl I love and see my sister. The one where my mother didn't commit a crime that destroyed 3 families. The one where 19 years of my existence wasn't a lie you watched unfold for entertainment." "Kyle, you can't buy that back, Mr. Grant. All the money in the world can't undo what you did by doing nothing." He put his gloves back on, picked up the lumber, started walking away. "I'm sorry," I called after him. He stopped, didn't turn around. "Sorry doesn't rebuild what you burned," he said. "It just makes you feel better about starting the fire." Then he was gone, swallowed by rain and scaffolding and the life he was building from the ashes of the one I'd destroyed. Patricia found the address in Charlene's employment records, leaked to the press, now public domain. The modest home sat on a street where children played in yards and neighbors knew each other's names. The kind of place where Charlene had raised my son, 3 jobs, and infinite love, somehow enough to build a life. She knocked, waited. Nearly left twice before the door opened. Charlene stood in the doorway, older than her, 43 years, wearing exhaustion like a second skin. When she saw Patricia, something broke behind her eyes. Relief, terror, desperate hope all at once. "You came!" "I didn't know if I should," Patricia admitted. They sat across the kitchen table in silence. No tea, no pleasantries. Just two women staring at the wreckage between them and trying to find words that didn't exist. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Patricia finally whispered. "You stole my life, gave me away like I was nothing." "You were everything," Charlene's voice cracked. "You were dying, and You chose wrong." "I know." Tears streamed down Charlene's face. "Every day for 19 years I've known. But Patricia, I need you to understand, when I looked at you in that incubator, tubes and monitors everywhere, I didn't see opportunity or wealth. I saw my daughter dying, and I thought if I gave you to him, you'd live. You'd have doctors and money and everything I couldn't give you. You gave me away to save me?" "I gave you away because I was terrified and desperate and too young to know that love matters more than money." Charlene wiped her eyes. "But watching you grow up from afar, seeing the woman you became, kind, compassionate, nothing like that cold world, I realized I gave you the best gift I could. You survived, you thrived, you became someone who cares about people like me. You don't get to be proud of that," Patricia said, but her voice wavered. "You weren't there." "I know, but I want to be now, if you'll let me." Patricia's hands trembled. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," Charlene admitted, "but I want to try." She stood, walked to a drawer, pulled out a small wooden box, set it between them on the table. Inside lay a tiny bracelet, tarnished gold, barely bigger than a child's wrist, engraved with shaky letters. "Martin, girl." "I bought this the day before you were born," Charlene said, running her fingers over the name. "Saved for 3 months. It was supposed to be yours, your first birthday present. But then you gave me away. Then I gave you life." Charlene's voice broke completely. "Forgive me, baby. I only wanted you to have more." Patricia reached across the table, took her mother's hand, said nothing, because what was there to say? Outside, rain drummed against the windows. In my car parked down the street, I watched through blurred glass as my daughter and the woman I'd punished for 19 years began the slow, painful work of healing. I was no longer the man behind the glass, no longer the observer orchestrating fates. Just a father who'd learned too late that truth costs more than fortune, and some prices can never be paid. The rain fell harder. This time, no one was watching to record the moment. No one was turning suffering into lessons or crimes into experiments. Just rain, just time, just two women holding hands across a kitchen table, trying to find their way back to each other through 19 years of darkness. And somewhere in the city, my son was building something new from the ruins I'd left him, without my money, without my name, without me, the way it should have been from the beginning.